Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Our guest today, Eden Laurin. Eden, please tell us where you are in the world and what you do for a living.
I am speaking to you from Raleigh, North Carolina, born and raised in Chicagoland area, and then have now moved to Raleigh. And this is my new home base. That being said, I go back to Chicago every couple of weeks. So I'm kind of city country living, as long as that doesn't offend anyone that's from the South.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about your brand. I was just taking a look at the Nyssa website, NyssaCare.com. So tell us kind of how you got started in this space and a little bit about your background.
My background was in food and beverage. So product development, mostly in the spirits and beverage industry. I was partner in a cocktail bar, have a James Beard in Chicago, very much part of the cocktail scene there. And then I had my first baby. And just like any industry, there wasn't a lot of support systems for postpartum. But even more than that, I was really shocked at the lack of products, the lack of conversation, knowing what to expect. And I had a girlfriend that worked in brand development that was 6 months pregnant. I had another girlfriend that I had done several business partnerships with over the years, and she had just had a baby. So I had gone to both of them and said, listen, I have this idea and I feel very comfortable with product development. And I see these products that we're given. It's like one size fits all mesh that doesn't really work. You kind of have to DIY hack. I was told to put cabbage leaves to help with breastfeeding. I mean, it's bananas. Like, it's like crazy. And so I said, what if, we could create something better? And so that's where the idea of Nyssa came to be. It took about a year to incorporate, kind of think about our first product, really structure the innovation. The two main components of any product that we've released is that it has to solve for something. I think women in general, and in particular after you're giving birth, I don't know, it kind of feels like you're in this vulnerable state that some companies, or we've seen historically, you kind of get taken advantage of, like you need all these things for baby and you need all these things or you'll be a bad parent. And we wanted to make sure that it was a very thoughtful, empathetically designed product. And then the other big part is that it functions. It's made for our bodies. It does what the industry professional, the doctors and the doulas and the midwives need it to do, and that it actually helps with our recovery. So the very first product entered the market at the tail end of 2019. And then we released 5 more products that were built around postpartum in 2020, like just perfect timing. And then Nyssa has 12 products in market.
That's amazing. Yeah. So I guess I'm curious, in that time frame, obviously, it's a little complicated, 2019, 2020 time, like started just before COVID, big e-commerce kind of boom. And then going into, obviously, everybody had to make some kind of pivot during that time. So what was your kind of first channel that you sold? Did you try to get into more of the wholesale side from the start and then had to kind of pivot online? Or did you really start with the online brand more?
Started with online. I think we came with a built-in audience. Our friends and some family members, they supported us, but they were also kind of in that same life stage. Right. So we could test and we could kind of even testing our voice, testing resources that we were offering and get kind of instant feedback. And it's always felt really important to us. Nyssa has done well as D2C and directly speaking to the consumers. You get a lot more engagement, you get a lot more feedback, you get to have a conversation. Since then, obviously, Amazon, I don't know how to avoid being on Amazon. And I will say, I have learned a lot over the last couple of years. I think Amazon can be an incredible strategic partner. It's just challenging and it takes a lot of capacity. I'm sure a lot of folks that are on that talk with you mention that. And especially as a small brand, it feels almost impossible. Same with wholesale. So we launched in CVS pretty young as a company. And thankfully, it was kind of a partnership building. We launched in a category that did not exist for CVS historically. So they never had a women's well-being. They never had a postpartum space. And so they wanted to test it out. And we were part of a handful of brands that could be on shelves nationally at CVS. Great, because essentially we were learning at the same time they were. And so So we could get a little bit of that access to data without paying a ton of money to get a whole data program with them. And then also kind of see regionally, geographically, where are we resonating? Does the product, are people passing on the shelves and grabbing it or not? And then take the heavy lifting of the marketing and the communication on the D2C side, which at the same time it's increasing brand awareness. So it has two purposes for us. And then of course it has the greater margin. So that's why we've leaned into D2C. Only now we've had a greater push toward B2B. And my dream is to be able to be in all the pivotal places that women need these kinds of products. Mm-hmm. So that would be in the hospital or after your birth center visit or with your doula, your pelvic floor therapist.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, just the nature of the product itself. I mean, D2C seems to be the natural course for something like this. And, but just based off of your background and how you got started with people very close to you, that makes sense. And I'm sure, as even just working with CVS, you can get some good feedback based off of like how it's coming off the shelves and things, but it's nothing like the feedback that you get personally, actually interacting with people who are buying it, trying it, giving you real and honest feedback and connecting with them that way. So yeah, I think that's some of the best relationships I think with your customers definitely come from the direct to consumer, but it is kind of hard to avoid the Amazons and, the wholesales because the visibility is just so big, especially in, wholesaling and being in like CVS's or maybe Targets and things like that. So how would you say, you've kind of progressed from doing almost all D2C to what like percentage of your, business is doing wholesale now?
I would say historically we were 99% D2C. And we're going to lean, I think in the next quarter we'll be like 80-20. And so that's marketplaces. That includes marketplaces like Fair, where people can buy cases and they don't have minimum order quantities. And we can play with that margin a little bit. I think that's the other thing. It seems to me in the last couple of years, more like retailers that are smaller, that don't necessarily have the power to buy a bunch of cases, or for instance, our apparel items are size. So if they want to be inclusive, now they're buying a couple of cases just to be able to have inventory of a few pieces of every SKU. And it's challenging in a classic wholesale model. And I do love some of these programs like Fair that allows for that relationship to build, and someone can buy a case or do a sample or something like that. And then they get to see reviews, and it's very turnkey as a brand. Anything that makes it easier for that transaction to happen and puts less pressure on having a commercial lead or having like wholesale capabilities internally is just a game changer.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And do you kind of find that you're trying to keep the wholesale to kind of this like 20/80 sort of model where it's you get the visibility out there, it's really to get eyes on and get people experiencing like how great the product is to really come back and then work with like the brand personally through e-com? Is that kind of like what you're hoping for?
Yeah, totally. I would say to layer onto that, it's also accessibility. So if it makes it just that much easier for somebody that might not have the time or the energy, in particular with our postpartum products, a baby's coming, you have a million things to do. So if it is you're in your birthing center or your OBGYN is like making this recommendation, and you can kind of bridge that gap to getting somebody to come to your website and buy it for themselves, I think that's really important. And whatever makes it easier for women to have the products that they need for their recovery. But I'd say the other part too, in particular for our items, I think it's having that advocacy element. When you know that a nurse or any kind of practitioner is making that recommendation, I just think that it does a huge amount for us rather than just as a consumer channel. So in general, what we know about women, and like a lot of this, I'm basing this on myself and my peers, but we don't prioritize our health and our care. When we're shopping for a household, or we're thinking about the household, and we're going to say, oh, I can buy that later, or I don't need that now. And I mean, I understand it because I do it day in, day out. And I think having where you get your knowledge, an industry pro, a pelvic floor therapist, when you go in for therapy saying, hey, listen, I recommend this product, or this is very good, or let's put heat on, and here's a pack that's made to the shape of your body. It does a lot. I think it reminds us as female consumers that we are a priority. Like, our health is important. If we feel strong, we feel comfortable. If our recovery is better, we can help take care of our family better. We can be, additive rather than just putting ourselves second.
Yeah. I can tell for you, obviously, like this goes a lot deeper than just like, how can we make the most amount of sales? We're not worried about anything else but making sales. So in that department, I mean, that's probably the best thing that you can do, is have those strategic partnerships with people that are providing care to women postpartum, or even maybe even leading up to. So it's a really beautiful thing. And I think some of the most successful companies that I come on the podcast, or just that I meet in general, I think have that aspect to them where it goes a lot further, either in the backstory or like in the actual operation of the business, that it goes a little bit further than just this brand, this product can make a lot of money because it works and it's functional. Like, it goes a little deeper than that. And I definitely see that with you. So
yeah, it's kind of a wonderful thing to be mission-based, I guess, because you always have kind of that anchor to go back to. And even when you're trying to think of a new product or thinking about the innovation pipeline, you're like, okay, but is it answering a need? Is it innovating? Is it based on these core elements? And it kind of keeps you honest to the products that you want to release. It's not always great for revenue building. I mean, like there was a conversation happening internally a couple of days ago, and Nyssa was built on this idea of product and resources. And by resources, we mean like just information. A lot of these things that we're talking about are not spoken about. We don't necessarily have the language for, we don't talk about them. And we often refer to them as the unmentionables of womanhood. So like, you don't want to say these words out loud just because it's not culturally acceptable. So that puts us on a back foot as a gender. Like, we don't have the tools that we need. We don't know what to expect. And so as much as Nyssa can not only bring a product to market, but also be honest and speak about it, there's no like scaring or using silly words. It's just, this is what to expect in your fourth trimester. This is what to expect when you get your period for the first time. And I think really being strategic and being strong in that. And we were discussing it because we have a really high open rate for our emails. We have a really high engagement rate. And we notice that it is mostly the audience is engaged when we bring a resource to the table. We're having a conversation. Well, that doesn't sell product. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, like, maybe it puts you top of mind if someone wants to make a recommendation or buy a gift for somebody else, but more likely they've already gone through that experience and they may need our period care products or some of our others, but they might also be in between. And so how do you still have a successful, growing company, because that's what we are, but still be true to that thesis? And it's a really fascinating, interesting journey.
It really is. And, especially when you think about it, when you start to experience a lot more growth, and maybe you take on, more people that have, vested interest in a company like this and things like that, there might be some competing, interests going on there. And it seems like, I mean, I can tell with you, like, you're definitely never going to give that up with what you started on, which was your mission. And it's not always easy to see how that directly contributes to the success, because it doesn't always directly relate to sales. Like just sending out, an email that gets a super high open rate that doesn't even have a link to a landing page. It just might be entirely informational. Those things are really hard to quantify as far as like success of a business or leading to sales. But when you know that what your whole business is predicated on that led to the initial success is on things like that, that you can't get away from it. So I applaud you for having a hard stance on that and continuing to maintain that side of the business, because I think it's really important. And it was just kind of similar to a conversation I had actually just earlier today with somebody who was doing a little bit of a different industry, but in the same way of that, one of the best ways to, spread a message and inform people is sometimes through consumer marketing in a for-profit business. It's almost the best way in many times, because if you're running maybe a nonprofit or just trying to do something, just to like spread awareness for things, like it's not always funded well enough. And it doesn't always, have something attached to it that can really bring something to the table where there's real interest with the information kind of attached to it. So I think you're doing a really amazing thing here in that. And I think this is really one of the best ways to spread awareness and spread, positive information for women who are, about to be or are postpartum. So
thank you. I really love that thought, because I hadn't really put it in that perspective before. For several years before I got into the hospitality world, I worked in nonprofit. And so directly after college, I went and lived in Guatemala. And then when I came back to the States, I worked in nonprofit. And something, even in my college experience, there was something that was always so frustrating, is that you would work so hard towards changing something. And it always felt like it was within reach. And like all we needed was just a little bit more power behind our platform, or a little bit more. And oftentimes I personally would have to move on. I would move on to the next job or the whatever before we actually saw the fruits of those labors. And it feels like you with being in the state that we're in now, where we're selling a product and you actually have like a corporate structure. What you said really resonates to me, because it almost like funds your platform, or it like allows you to have that voice. And it's kind of like bittersweet realization to make, but
yeah, it's so funny because you like it or not, I mean, we are still a capitalist country. It's very still a capitalist world, and as you go through and innovate in this area like you have been, working with your manufacturers, working with your whoever does your, or whoever you partner with, your fulfillment and logistics and things, they might hear about this, what you're doing, and they work with 100 people and they might mention it to somebody, and then somebody else might say, you know what, that is actually a super underserved industry, and like people don't talk enough about it. There's not enough products out there. So I think like the relationships and partnerships that you make in this way as a for-profit brand, I think, because that's really what, like, unfortunately, like that's what talks. Money talks, and those relationships that you find when you are like trying to make money together with partners, it can, I think, start that conversation even in like more like in a softer way than like, more direct way like you are. So yeah, they actually said that to me. It was not my statement. So like that really resonated with me too. I was like, it's so true. And like, even though it might be maybe slightly unfortunate for some reasons, depending on, whatever mind space you're in about any of those kinds of things. I mean, I think it is true. I don't think there's a better vehicle to deliver a message and, start a conversation than, things like what you're doing. So it's really awesome.
I also think we need more underrepresented led brands. We need more women at the table. So in many ways too, we need more femtech innovation. There's so many times in a women's life that we are underserved or like design is marginalized. And I think that there's plenty of amazing work that's happening in nonprofit sphere that's drawing attention to that and creating really meaningful change. But I think this is another way to do it and kind of to push that needle.
No, it definitely is. And let me just ask you too. So I'm curious. I know you said, did you say you're on Amazon now, or you say like you're about to be, but you are?
No. Yeah, we are on Amazon. And the reason I caught myself when I said, or maybe I like made a face or something about going on, is because it is intensely challenging. There's a lot of hidden fees. It's not always in the best interest of the supplier. Just like, let's just call that out. But last year Amazon had highlighted Nyssa as a brand. We do a lot of donation. We give a pair of apparel for every pair sold. And so we did win an award called the Force for Good Award.
Oh, wow.
And it was a complete surprise. And it was the first time that they gave it, and they gave it to 2 other brands besides us. And being in that environment and meeting these teams that are behind the scenes at Amazon doing all this work to change their packaging so it's more recycled and eco-friendly, and just a list of things that they are prioritizing. I got to say, I was pretty impressed, and they're easy to dislike, but there are some things in the back end that I really do think that there's an understanding of their power and their clout, that there can be like meaningful impact and positive impact. And I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, I mean, from the outside looking in, all you see is like Jeff Bezos yacht, right? But yeah, I mean, I have heard from some others that look exactly like you're saying, like, while it is very difficult, they actually are pretty like easy to work with, and also are very like, innovative in a lot of ways that people really care about in those ways. So that isn't the first time I've heard that, but I know it's kind of its own universe there as far as like, the business side of it is concerned. It's like its own advertisers, it's its own optimization. It's totally separate from anything else you've ever learned about just like regular digital marketing across like, regular browser kind of thing. So yeah, and on that side of things, I guess I'm just curious, like what kind of platforms do you, utilize in your own marketing? I know you do like some strategic partnerships, or obviously in stores, so you get a lot of visibility that way. Do you have any big like social media pushes or like campaigns you've been running? What platforms are you on? And also, do you also take advantage of any like real traditional digital marketing like Google ads and Facebook ads and things?
We are really fortunate because a former Amazonian has joined the team. So she leads on the Amazon
That's
front.
awesome.
So
can't beat
she
that.
speaks the language. Yeah. And then everything else is traditional. So we were off Meta for 3 to 4 months just because we were just shifting some things operationally. And we have just relaunched, which is, I think, another bittersweet relationship. I find really fascinating, and it's how much it has changed over the last, like, since we launched. And that was our like top performing channel and our most meaningful relationship. And then like, it's just changed how we interact as consumers with especially Instagram, but also Facebook, and then Google. And that's it. Email marketing, obviously really important for us. And then, yes, you mentioned partnerships. So brands that are in the same space or like adjacent industry pros that we just launched an affiliate program. So having people be like really representatives of the brand is, I think, a untapped potential for sure.
Yeah, I think a really interesting piece of kind of industry, I wish the industry is a little too broad, or just kind of like products like this is, so many things you get into. And I get a lot of CPG folks that come on that do like, packaged foods and frozen foods and bottled drinks and things like that. It's so competitive that you'll do anything to stand out, and you don't want to bring any attention to anybody who's kind of your parallel. But in a product like this, there needs to be so much more general awareness that you're still on the stage with this type of product where everybody wins when there's visibility anywhere. And I think that's a really awesome place to be as a growing brand, where you're not necessarily concerned with, standing out so much all the time. You don't want to do anything anybody else is doing and carving out your niche this really specific way. It's kind of like a joint women-led, which is amazing effort, in this space to drive visibility. It's just great for everybody. If you can get more eyes on products like this and like get more eyes on that, like this is a really big problem that is being like really undersolved in the market. So it's a really fun place to be, and to be able to do those partnerships, I'm sure, is really awesome and fun. You do that like on your socials. Is that kind of where that generally operates? That's really cool.
There's so many interesting femtech innovations, products that are coming out. Really, our mission is to serve women from puberty to beyond menopause. Right now, the focus, our launch was in postpartum, and then flash forward in the stage that we're in right now, I'm being hyper focused in postpartum because of the B2B work and just making us be really tight. But we'll start showcasing and shining light on our other products again. The poor guys are in the shadows for a little while while we focus on the postpartum side or fourth trimester. But when we say that, I mean, 5 products really meaningful that are specifically around postpartum. Well, there's so many needs women have that, like, even in the fourth trimester. So when yesterday I was talking to a brand that is a basal temperature device, and it's a really, really awesome innovation. And I was like, man, great for you guys. And like, what an incredible piece of technology that women really need for everything from fertility to perimenopause. And instead of going to them with something very specific, I was like, what works for y'all? What is your audience like? And like, this is what resonates with our audience. And let's think about it as we would be the consumer. So like, what is it that we want? And it's a really interesting way to approach the partnerships, because although it does make it a little bespoke, some people kind of fit a model and maybe we're using a backlink or a blog post, but positioning them in our newsletter. But when it's something that is just a little bit outside, but we know that majority of our audiences are interested in each other's brands, then we can be really creative. Like, what would we want? And so and let's build it. And
that's amazing. And also when you think about like partnerships, I suppose, really call it like B2B business, but just like partnerships in general, have you considered or been approached by anybody for, kind of private labeling? Obviously your designs are super proprietary because it's, it's not something that really exists all that much, already. So have you been approached with any kind of opportunities like that? And do you think you would ever, you'll consider doing anything like that?
Honestly, I would absolutely consider it, because I think it continues to service that need, which is getting those designs into women's hands. But no, I don't recall any time that I've gone to various people and said that we would do this and like, it'll be great for y'all. but it wasn't the right match.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting though. I'm kind of surprised that nobody's like reached out to you on that. And I wouldn't be shocked if somebody does probably very soon in the future as you continue to grow. But the private labeling side of things is always a really interesting vertical that I like to talk about, because I don't know, just like I feel like there's just a lot of differing opinions in kind of like the clothing space, or, any kind of like innovation space where like, how much are you really giving up? And like, it would have to be too crazy of like a deal for it to really make sense to like give the design to somebody else. So how do you kind of grapple, with that? Obviously it would be I agree with you, it would be an awesome opportunity just to further and get it into more women's hands that need it to be able to private label it to somebody else. But do you kind of grapple with that a little bit of like not wanting to give up like the proprietary designs of what you're doing, potentially maybe even it falling into the wrong hands and maybe being like taken advantage of? Or how do you kind of think about that?
We had a really tremendously difficult year because a design that has a pending patent and a granted patent, it was brought to market in a way that felt that it was copied and by another brand. And, it was a 100% the amount of learning and lessons that I think within this like 9-month span was like an MBA in itself.
Yeah.
And going into it, and I would like to draw more attention to the power of IP. I honestly had thought that a patent was gospel. I thought if you had a patent, you go through all of that work and that time, and it takes years and it takes so much money, not just for your lawyers and your representation, but also for the drawings and the filings. And I just thought it was such a protective measure that, like, that's it. And I know there is the theories and the lessons around building that, like, brand moat. And so honestly, we kind of dual path that. Nyssa has always been built on these particular innovations and these designs. So I thought the brand moat was being built too. And I wouldn't say that I thought we were untouchable or that wasn't going to happen, but it was shocking. It was shocking. And literally every single person that was not like a family member or friend, like a lawyer or any kind of professional that we brought the case to or brought the situation to, said, yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. And so, like, the disparity there, like, I was shocked to my core. And then I tell anyone and they're like, yeah, I mean, that's commonplace. And so it made me understand that there's so much more out there. This is happening. This is so prevalent. This happens all the time. And when we have this, I don't know, a year ago, if you had asked me that question, I would have said, no, like, I have to protect by every way possible. Now I think I'm a little like grizzly, like, or whatever. I'm like hardened, and there is no protection. Now my answer is there is no protection. What you do is you create something quality. You stand by what it is that you're making. You stand by the communication and the messaging that's around it. Someone else is going to take it. Someone else is already doing it. If you're successful, that's some companies, that's all they're doing is looking for what is successful. And then that's what they're copying. Yeah. So I would say I would be open to it. Again, I might have answered that question differently in the past. Now I would say I would be open to it because it brings back to that idea that, like, there's no way to protect everything, but what do women need? What do women need? And if they're getting the same product, and it might be in our packaging with our beautiful label, or they're getting it with somebody else's, but I know that quality is good and it's designed to their bodies and it's functional and it's going to help with their recovery, and we can change the future of women's well-being, well then, like, I'm not going to swear because I don't know if swearing's allowed on your podcast, but let's do it. That's what I would say. Yeah. And obviously within, like, not at a loss, and it needs to be a brand that we can feel good about. Right.
Yeah.
We saw this really big movement, and I'm wondering if you saw this trend with people that you have spoken with, but there were a lot of female-led brands that launched around the same time as us. E-com brands got pushed 2020, 2021, grew, scaled really quickly, went into the Targets and the Walmart, like, launches, dealt with all the challenges that happens there, covering shelving fees, scaling inventory, just everything. And after a year of being in some of these places, often through these, like, minority incubator programs, their product gets copied by the retailer. And, like, so many times that I have talked to a CEO or a co-founder, and they have said, beware, or heads up. Like, the program's great because it's going to get you on shelves. You are just part of their test. That's it. They're incubating the idea. They're not incubating you as a company. And knowing that and everything that happened with us, it's like, this is the reality.
Yeah. And one of the most frustrating things about that is, a growing brand getting maybe a big wholesale deal for the first time. The incubator program's fantastic, but they go and do these things because knowing that you don't really have, like, the capital capacity to really go after, if somebody were to, like, try to take something from your idea. I mean, that's like the barrier. The barrier isn't the legal protection. The barrier is the actual capital. Like, we know you're not going to do anything. Oh, that's going to hurt your bottom line more than what we're doing in copying in the first place. You know what I mean? Yeah, no, 100%. It's tough out there. It really is. And I have not heard any stories about that. And I hope it's not something that, because I've heard a lot of people that are a part of the incubator programs currently. So I hope that's not something that turns around and I hear happens, somewhere down the future as I continue to keep in touch with I've had a ton of women on the podcast recently, Women's History Month and everything else. It's just been a huge, massively growing space. So it's been also, I've had tons of women business owners come on. And I have heard a lot about the incubator program, but I have not heard anything about, like, any stories specifically like that. Fortunately, I hope it's not something I hear about anytime soon, but not too surprising either to hear that.
Yeah, not surprised.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Let me ask you, there's one question I always love to ask everybody that comes on the
Sure.
podcast. You've obviously had tremendous success, learned a ton, like a lot of what we talked about already. And, if you could kind of go back to day one of the brand, like knowing everything you know now on the legal side and everything that you've learned, kind of business or personal, if you give yourself one piece of advice, what do you think that piece of advice would be if you go back to the beginning and start over?
I think I would, from the beginning, match up my expectations for the growth of the business with the fundamental structure. So instead of Nyssa launching in with the mentality of a small business, but with the goals of a quick scaling large company, corporation, to either choose one, organically grow, and then it's okay to have, friends and family and major roles, and we don't have particular talents or background in an area, like no big deal, and lower expectations, and just keep it a slow, steady growth. Or have the goals and the ambitions for a large company and plug in people that aren't necessarily friends and family, and that have the skill sets that are required. And I think that I tried to do both, and they were at odds with each other. And I don't regret a moment of it, but it was definitely something that required a lot of learning.
Do you feel like you were kind of like in both of those mind spaces at different points in time throughout the growth
Absolutely.
of the business? Like you just kind of started that way and then got into like, oh, I see the potential. Let's kind of go to this like kind of mode and thought process of things. And then maybe it would get like a little too far to the other side and it kind of was like rubber banding back and forth that way.
Truthfully, it was just from the get-go, was always caught in the middle of both. I'm an ambitious person. And if I have an idea, like organic growth would never fit well for me. Like it wouldn't. So it didn't, when I had the idea of Nyssa, it was never, I'd like to make an underwear. It was from the very first moment that I had the idea of Nyssa, it was, I want to change the future of women's well-being. So I only know that side of it. But I think when I'm having the opportunity today is to be able to think of like, well, then who is the best at, I want to be on Amazon. Let's put an Amazonian.
Yeah.
Just thinking of what are the tools, the fundamental tools to get there. And I feel incredibly fortunate that I'm able to do that. And I feel incredibly fortunate for every single person that's been on the journey thus far, because we've built this together. And I still want to change the future of women's well-being.
That's amazing. Well, I feel I'm very proud to be some very minute, small part of this journey with you. I think you're doing amazing work. I mean, I think anybody would agree. And, I also really appreciate your time here today, sharing your insights, sharing your experiences. We have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to the podcast, a lot of women entrepreneurs that listen. And I think it's extremely important that they hear, some of the things that you've been through and what you're trying to do with your brand and how to grapple with the values that everybody has at the core of their business, but also trying to make it scale and grappling with those things. So I think it's really important. I think your insights are extremely valuable to those women and everybody, honestly. Also, just want to give you a quick opportunity before we get off here to, just shout out any, socials you have. People watch the podcast, they love you, they want to follow the brand. Maybe they're, coming up on the fourth trimester and they're like, they didn't know about something like this or hearing about it for the first time. Let people know how to keep in touch with you guys.
Yep. And just even if there's no anticipation of being in the fourth trimester anytime soon, we have products for endometriosis and fibroids and cysts and all the things that we don't talk about that we all go through constantly. And everything can be found at our website. So that's nyssacare.com. And then our Instagram, which is Nyssa Care. And to just respond to what you just said, I also want to make sure that you're getting the thanks and the gratitude that you deserve, because it is a lot of hard work on the back end and the operations. But if it wasn't for you handing the mic or giving that kind of that platform or that ability for us to talk about it, then we don't necessarily find each other. We don't get the insights and hear it from someone else. And I listen to your podcast and I can hear someone else's experience and learn from it. So very much appreciate that. Mike, thanks for all the work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. You as well. It's an honor, a privilege to meet you, Eden. And I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.